Hey everybody, how you guys doing? I'm Eric Gerlach, this here is Tiger, and we're going to talk to you, mostly me, about another talk on philosophy, American thought, and the pragmatist William James, who is the one of the pair of founding pragmatists with Peirce. I just gave a short talk, on all of that. And my lecture content is not pleasing. Hey buddy. What's up, pal? What's up, pal? What's up, pal? Right? Yes, he's a practical tiger. Yes. All right. But enough kissy time. It's time for thinking, not kissing. So anyway, the William James, who lived from 1842 to 1910, was a philosopher and psychologist, one of the first to teach psychology classes in America. Psychology pretty much became a word and a thing kind of in the late 1800s amongst Germans and then others. James's father was a Swedenborgian theologian, a believer in the unity of science and religion for the understanding of human psychology and metaphysics, and James is most famous for his work on the psychology of religion, author of the influential book The Varieties of the Religious Experience, written in 1902, or published then. If you know anything about Swedenborg, many would not, or have not even heard the name possibly. Swedenborg was a theologian of, I'm going to screw up the dates, it's either late 17 or early 1800s, who was trying to do angelology still, as well as the sciences, and figure all of that out together, and figure out how metaphysics and angels all work together with chemistry. And there are some who are very interested still in his work, both historically and in belief and actual. And yes, there is in this town, in the associations I have been associated with, there's a Swedenborgian center I have been to and exchanged books with for work, etc. Which I don't know of other Swedenborgian centers, but why would I? I am not a Swedenborgian, but yes. William James's godfather, was the transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Raldo. I'm going to name my firstborn son or daughter Raldo. And then we can try to find them. Wore that name in little license plates. His godfather was Ralph Waldo Emerson. Try to find it. And James later joined the Theosophical Society, early proponents of Buddhism and esoteric spiritualism, much the New Agers of their day, and the group from which Krishnamurti eventually emerged. As Peirce's friend from his Harvard school days, James is credited with being one of the founding pragmatists, and later he was a friend and colleague of Dewey, Bertrand Russell, Freud, and Bergson. Henri. Like Nietzsche, James suffered from many health conditions throughout his life. He taught philosophy and psychology at Harvard for his entire career. His students included Gertrude Stein, Theodore Roosevelt, W.E.B. Du Bois, the famed African-American author and thinker, and George Santayana. James was a strong supporter of pragmatism in philosophy and functionalism in psychology, very similar positions. What is pragmatism in philosophy can be called functionalism in the social sciences and sciences, which you can also use the word pragmatism for that. His functionalism influenced his view that religion is not about the simple verifiable truth of beliefs, but about their social function and benefit. Now, recently, I have seen, and I won't name names, but somebody did recently argue in a piece that was actually online in a very public place that belief in, say, God or gods is beyond scientific verification. That would be actually slightly a different position, because a functionalist would say, well, what does belief in God do? And that's what we see it doing. But it is true that in a certain sense, one would never fully justify any beliefs beyond practices. So this is not the position, and I just feel that it needs to be mentioned. There are some who would say, well, there's scientific beliefs that are functional, and then God is a non-functional belief or something, and that's how it should be, which is actually the pro-theological position this person online was putting in a very prominent public place online. This is a different position that scientific, religious, all beliefs are simply how they socially function, and whatever they do, good and bad, that way, as far as we live and understand them. And so, in a certain sense, no beliefs can be justified outside of practice, which does not mean you do or don't do beliefs that are justifiable, of course. Because in a certain sense, I can't justify why we should believe in science rather than Zerblat right now, but that doesn't mean because I can't justify it, we shouldn't go along with what functions. So in a certain sense, one can neither fully explain science nor theology nor religion, but that's not the point according to the functionalist. You don't fully, this is very Wittgenstein, and Wittgenstein loved William James, and I love Wittgenstein. I like him a lot more than William James, I study him a lot more. But Wittgenstein is extremely similar in the sense that if we stop and pay attention to how much we explain things, we never fully explain anything. I often say we don't fully explain apples. I use that line a lot, because it's an extremely pragmatic functionalist idea that you don't fully explain apples nor need to, and to appreciate what that plays in the system. And then we can see why, while William James is talking about religious belief in systems, he really is applying this anthropologically to science, politics, art, everything, as far as we are all very much, for William James and then the later structuralists like Levi-Strauss in France, we're all essentially tribal human beings who function, and that is very meant to be kind of egalitarian and equalizing, and I do like all of that plenty in this Berkeley town. So he was James influenced a lot. He was an opponent of Hegel. James argued Hegelian dialectics were an unhelpful system of metaphysics that was more limiting than revealing, which Peirce's work looks like it's Hegelian, but then rounding off all the edges and not really caring about being faithful to anything Hegel. James argued that beliefs are true if they are useful, which the truth is the use, and that is very controversial, of course. Again, with this most and not so metaphysical club. While, like a positivist, James argued that useful truth would be correspondent and coherent, which is very much positivism, have not covered yet, which is very much Russell and in dialogue with all this, that truth would correspond to reality and it would be coherent and not contradict itself, would fit with the world and fit together with itself. But, like a pragmatist, these are dimensions of the usefulness of the thing, not categories that can be abstractly applied. It isn't that a thing is simply coherent, its coherence and non-contradiction is its lack of problems in the real world. The most ancient, it's not metaphysically logically correct by being non-contradictory, which is more the positivist and classic analytic answer. The most ancient of human beliefs were based on new discoveries and debatable, yet in both ancient and modern times, William James wrote, purely objective truth, ... is nowhere to be found. I am, I hope, faithfully representing that, even with the ... in the middle. Purely objective truth, and he says blah, 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 is nowhere to be found, meaning we always have eyes and ears and are human in the world, and that is objectivity as the social, very much, constructs. And that is real, actual reality as viewed through eyes, ears, human subjectivity. The objective, the subjective, all very much one and the same, somewhat coherent and consistent with itself as we observe and understand. Entirely objective analysis is impossible in a situation that is always in motion, he argued. James similarly argued that consciousness is a stream, which is another of his very famous ideas, often referred to as, quote, stream of consciousness, end quote, in psychology. William James is still a darling of many in psychology. And so individual and social forms of thought are never in an entirely stable place to take full account of themselves. This is similar to Heidegger's idea that the world is inarticulate unless an area of particular concern is of concern to us. Which Heidegger does say, and it fits here very much, you are closer to your friend you are waving to across the street than the pavement you are not paying attention to right beneath your feet. I make it rhyme in the English and the Anglais. So, which is not Heidegger's precise words, but that is his image, because what you are concerned with is what you are near to. And in fact, I did argue with a friend once who was more positivistically minded. If we did a frequency analysis, would we find near to with other human beings refers to physical distance literally, or would we find the metaphysical, playful, non-serious, for Searle, use of the word to actually be the more dominant use of the word when we use near to human beings? We would use it emotionally more than we would use I'm 16 inches away from this person or 15 feet, unless we're getting a restraining order of some kind. Hopefully it's farther. So with all of that, actually many would say, oh, but the literal quantized distance is the physical objective truth. Not to the head unconcerned with that distance, it isn't. It's more concerned with the friend across the street, and that is reality, mental and physical, would the functionalist would argue. So how is the tribe enacting and their dances, their rituals, their performances? This all fits very much with Foucault, postmodernism, and everything in it should. Because it is a decently skeptical versus objective, a subjective versus objective, a skeptical and cynical a bit, and historical view of human truth with pragmatism. So we have stream of consciousness, and Heidegger is very much part of the in the flow, and he is possibly copying a bit of James. Some have accused Heidegger of taking a bit from James's stream of consciousness and talking about the flow, which Heidegger doesn't make much of the word flow, but that is very much what he is describing. Although all these folks can be thinking of Heraclitus, and I have to do a Heraclitus talk, and he is my favorite of Greek philosophers, very soon. Heraclitus says all flows like a river, and thus one can never step in the same river twice. He actually says you can and can't step in the same river twice in another fragment, and says we similarly are and are not ourselves. As Barbara Kruger, the feminist artist, did a piece that says, you are not yourself, and shows a woman's face in a shattered mirror. Also, your body is a battleground, quoting Wollstonecraft for her. So, some have speculated, again, Heidegger may have borrowed some of this from William James, as he had a colleague at Freiburg, as mentioned, who studied the work of James and other American pragmatists, which would link this as proto-existentialism in a more skeptical, not necessarily cynical, but skeptical view of truth. Wittgenstein said, I am a pragmatist, but I really don't want to be, and it's possible what he was saying. My best understanding of those words is that dying in the wake of years after World War II, Wittgenstein did not believe that science, Wittgenstein stayed with Schopenhauer in the position that the history of a village is the history of an empire, and the history of science since Sumer is not creating more logical humanity at all. It is just making humanity survive, is just consistency. Again, as the book, Daily Show, the book mentioned a long time ago, we, in a fake, in a page on fake American political posters, like, if I was a firstborn property-owning white male, I would vote for the Earl of Norfolk. And says, we gave up on being decent a long time ago. Now we just have to settle for being consistent, which is the more cynical way of phrasing pragmatism. But pragmatism very much is pro-science, a lot. And maybe pro-social sciences, which is very French thought, also Foucault, as the psychiatrist, the physiakiatrist, for Ricky Ricardo. And with all of that, with all of this sorts of stuff, the work of William James and all of these folks has been massively important for much of the social sciences, and thus for much of human culture, the arts. The existentialists, the structuralists, the post-structuralists, the postmodernists, and Wittgenstein, my favorite, and all of that. Effectively remaining a Schopenhauerian, Wittgenstein said, I am a pragmatist, but I don't think science is progress, just like Schopenhauer, is what he says. This also reminds us that during World War II, a British colleague told Wittgenstein, who was an Austrian and Jewish, and quite conflicted about all that, possibly closeted gay like Foucault, basically said, I believe the Brits will win because they have a better national character. And Wittgenstein said, Howard turns to him and says, how can you do philosophy and be so stupid a human being? So, for Schopenhauer and for Wittgenstein and for the brooding Germans, again, a group of existentialists is a brood, French or German. And again, human nature, parents just don't understand. Human nature does not seem to change much, in spite of science and world wars. So, that all said, much love and happiness, again, and much functionality to your life. Again, hopefully you are feeling a bit good and bad, or else you are dead. And I will, as always, see you, most hopefully, if I ever do, ever see you.